Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here, back with another bonus Smarter Science of Slim podcast. Very, very excited about today's show because we have one of the premier podcasters in the world joining us, a licensed nutritionist with a master's in science in human nutrition, a speaker with the Macmillan Speakers Bureau, a blogger on the Huffington Post, a popular author, someone who actually has a singing career as well. Maybe we can get into that a little bit. Otherwise known as the Nutrition Diva on social media and on iTunes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have none other than Ms. Monica Reinagel. Monica, welcome to the show.
Wow, Jonathan, that's quite an introduction. I almost expect to hear the applause sound effect.
Where's the applause-o-meter when you need it?
I'm looking around, wondering who you're describing. I guess it's me.
Well, Monica, I wanted to give that introduction not only because you deserve it, but also because one thing I've really enjoyed about your work and about our previous conversations is about this concept, and your brand does this so well, of health not being a burden, but rather health being a blessing, health being something that can be simple, and health being something that can be empowering and helping us to communicate the message of health, not less so to the 1% that already get it, but making it accessible and fun for the 99% who really, really need it.
Well, there's so much to talk about, and I feel like no matter where you are entering the conversation, there's something that can inspire you, that can, motivate you to make better choices, and that, I love that idea. And Jonathan, you and I have talked about this before offline, about that idea of extending the conversation to include people who might not wake up in the morning thinking about, how many grams of fiber they're going to have for breakfast, but would really benefit, from getting excited, a little bit more excited about nutrition and food choices.
Well, and Monica, one thing that I think you can add such great insight to, because you are a content powerhouse, meaning like folks, if I would highly recommend checking out Monica's website over at nutritionovereasy.com. She has it's like a freaking Encyclopedia Britannica. And in order to, in some ways, keep the mill churning, to keep coming up with interesting information about nutrition, sometimes we have to talk about isolated things like fiber or intermittent fasting or this or that or this supplement. And sometimes that can make it seem like this is a complicated thing, but in reality, it's really not that complicated. But if it's not complicated, in some ways we run out of content to cover. So there's a bit of a paradox there. How do we cross that chasm or bridge that gap?
Well, I think that there's an interesting principle that applies here. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's called the Pareto principle, and it applies to a lot of different things. But in this context, it means that often you get about 80% of the benefit from the first 20% of the effort. And I feel like when people start to try to make changes to their diet, it's that first effort produces enormous results. And then if they get hooked and they want to go further, well, yes, they can continue drilling down and getting, more and more specific and incrementally, improving their nutrition status. But I think it's that first step that in some ways is the most important. So there's, I do get, I can be a little bit of a nutrition wonk. I get interested in these really kind of esoteric questions that people bring up just from a point of scientific curiosity. I'm interested in learning how the body works, how our bodies interact with food and the environment and, and all of that. I think it's great to always kind of come back to that it's the basics that make the biggest difference. Just really simple things that everybody can focus on, like, I sometimes get teased because I'm always telling people to eat their vegetables, which seems like such a frumpy old thing that your grandmother would say. But I really feel like if you were going to focus on one thing, one or two things, that would certainly be one of them, just by, making an effort to eat 4 or 5 servings of vegetables every day, all kinds of great things cascade from that without you having to know the name of every individual antioxidant in those vegetables.
Absolutely, Monica. I love that concept of the Pareto principle, or sometimes I refer to it as big versus small levers. Like, will taking supplement X or powder Y help you? Maybe that's a really small lever. Will eating more vegetables help you? Yes, and that's a gigantic lever. Like the amount of effort, the return on investment there, or for getting better sleep, or for drinking more water, or just simply ensuring you're getting a more nutrient-dense intake of foods. Those levers, those are the big levers, right?
Yes, I totally agree. So it's for those of us who spend our lives talking about nutrition and going down these little rabbit holes. Oh, is the oxalic acid in my green tea interfering with iron absorption? Like, okay, back up a second. It's all part of the larger conversation. But as you and I have chatted before, Jonathan, I think that we want to be sure that we're continuing to reach out to people who aren't already. It's easy to preach to the choir. Mm-hmm. And if we're really, when you talk about levers, there's levers in our individual lives and bodies, but then there's also levers on the population level. And if we're looking to move the levers on public health, then we need to make sure that we're spending a lot of our energy reaching out to folks who are still eating 10 or 12 times a week in fast food restaurants and helping them help make it imaginable for them to make a shift in that pattern.
Well, and Monica, in terms of how we can do that, I'm gonna fall back into what limited formal training I have in this world, and that is a degree in economics. And again, I'm an economist at heart, kind of. I'm a lot of different things at heart, but in some ways, I feel that eating at a fast food restaurant, for example, the day that a nutrient-dense, delicious meal is less expensive than a hamburger and fries is the day this becomes widely adopted. And it also seems like people say, well, that's just not possible. Well, it is, right? Our government does things, and I don't want to turn this into a conspiracy conversation. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. We subsidize the production of certain plants and certain animals, and not of other plants and animals. What do you think are the policy-wide food regulation changes that could be made to help make eating nutrient-dense whole foods easier and more mainstream?
Well, I think that cost is definitely a factor. And, people are going to, especially people that don't have a lot of money to spend on food, they're going to be looking for the most calories for the fewest dollars, But I think that in your sort of fantasy world where that nutrient-dense meal at McDonald's is, cheaper than the value meal with the extra large fries is only half of it, because there is also a habit that we've formed. People have come to prefer foods that are high in salt, high in sodium, high in sugar, high in fat. And there's some biological reasons that we're kind of predisposed to develop those preferences. So I think, not to rain on your parade, but I think that changing food policy and, trying to attack this at an economic angle is really worth pursuing. It's probably not going to be the entire solution because, in a way, we have really trained our brains to respond to certain stimulus, and it's going to be hard. Quite frankly, I don't want to be pessimistic about it, but I think it's hard to get people to shift from those dietary patterns, even if you make it cheaper, because there's some pretty heavy-duty just preferences involved, You
Absolutely.
know, taste for that food, and you get used to it. So we also have to change habits. But to answer the question you actually asked, it seems so simple where we sit to say, why doesn't our government subsidize healthy food instead of unhealthy food that's just a no-brainer? And I do think that that's a big part of the problem, but I don't want to underestimate how complex this problem has gotten and how many, deep roots it has into various sectors of people's well-being. This all kind of came about as a way to support what used to be the primary profession in America, which was agricultural workers, farmers. That's how most people in this country used to make their living. And so I guess it made sense at one point, for the government to support those farmers, with policies that helps them weather changes in market price and natural weather problems. So it's one of those things where it could be that each decision in this chain of events made a certain logic at the time, but now we look back on the accumulated impact of all those decisions. We look at our farm bill, we look at our subsidizing programs, and we say, wow, this really produced some very unintended consequences. But unrolling that, I don't want to oversimplify how difficult that is. I do wish that our lawmakers could get a little bit more ambitious about solving this problem, about balancing the needs of our farmers, to be protected, to be supported, with the needs of our country to have a healthy population. I feel like they could probably do a better job. But I also want to be somewhat sympathetic to just like the complexities of this. I feel like in our world, yours and mine, Jonathan, we can run around on social media saying like, oh, the farm bill and big ag and, Congress is in their pockets and be really sort of harsh and maybe overly simplistic about what those solutions involve. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to push for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, Monica, I think there's two important points here. And one is certainly agreeing with you on the principle of necessary and sufficient. So like it seems like the economic play is necessary, but it's insufficient. Certainly cigarettes are very expensive and very taxed. People still smoke. So the idea that making something expensive will get rid of the problem, it certainly does not solve anything, and certainly that's not it's not saying just make all food more expensive. That would just that wouldn't help anyone. So this is a necessary but insufficient approach. Of course, personal responsibility comes into play. The question that I have though is, it seems like a lot of the arguments that people on more of a policy public health level make could have and undoubtedly were made about the tobacco industry before cigarettes were thought of as, or before, let's say, cigarettes were regulated in any way, shape, or form. Cigarettes used to be advertised on television as healthy for you, and there was a Tobacco Research Institute, and Coke just founded the Sugar Research Institute, for lack of better terms. How is this different? And I'm going to just caveat that with one quick thing. I think there's a false dichotomy that people make, and that's, well, you have to eat, so it's more complicated because you don't have to smoke. I think that's a false dichotomy, because what that's really saying is we do have to breathe. That doesn't mean we have to breathe in smoke-filled air. And we do have to eat, but that doesn't mean we have to eat genetically modified grains. So we absolutely have to eat, but that doesn't mean we have to eat certain things. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you make a great point in terms of, certain things being, helpful, but not the entire solution. And so we can try to, implement economic policies. I lived in Germany for many years, a long time ago, back during my singing career that you alluded to. And while I was there, very funny, I lived in Bavaria, which is where they drink beer for breakfast. So, you just drive through the hops fields, and the beer in Bavaria is really, I've never quite gotten over it. It was so amazing. But while I was there, they passed a law saying that if you were in a, in a tavern, in a bar, there had to be a non-alcoholic beverage available that was at least as cheap as the beer. In other words, they didn't want people ordering another beer just because it was the cheapest thing that they could order. If you wanted to have, a mineral water, a sparkling water, or a juice or something instead, they didn't want that choice to be counter-incentivized by the price. I thought that was a very interesting, kind of illustration of what you're talking about. We have to make the healthy choice at least, economically viable. But I think that there's also, we have to change opinion. We have to, and that I'm sort of encouraged by some of the things that are beginning to happen in the school system. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, which is a very urban, inside the city limits, very low socioeconomic average income. Our city schools are very poor and under-resourced, and, it's just that. Well, we've all seen The Wire, right? It's all true. But there's some really exciting things going on in the Baltimore public school system where they're clearing lots in the middle of these blighted neighborhoods in the cities that happen to be around these poor, benighted elementary schools. And they're taking the kids out there and they're starting urban gardens. And they have been so creative and so loving about the way they've integrated this into the curriculum. Think of the things that you can teach an elementary school child in the act of growing a garden. You can talk about, climate. You could talk about biology. You could talk, all kinds of things. And you can also help these kids who live in neighborhoods where you buy your food at a convenience store because there's no grocery store within easy access. They live in food deserts. And these kids, for the first time, actually see a vegetable coming out of the ground and can get really excited about it. And how do you get a kid excited about eating a green bean? You let them grow it. Mm-hmm. You let them water it. You let them pick it. You teach them how to cook it, and there's no longer any conversation about whether they want to eat that green bean. They cannot wait to eat that green bean. So I see these programs, not just the little, pilot program that gets a little spot on the evening news, making a difference, but I see them actually catching on and rolling out these programs so that they're touching more and more kids. More and more kids are having this experience with their hands in the dirt. They're growing foods that are then being vended to the school cafeterias and distributed within their communities on, food trucks and things. I think those kinds of programs are the sort of, what's that military thing where the battle for the hearts and minds?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That combined with the, smart economic policy choices do have the potential to move that lever. And I think they're starting in the right place. You have to catch kids young before their habits are fully formed and kind of inculcate these experiences, these values, this appreciation. And then you got to wait for that generation to grow up. But at least we've started. And that actually, maybe I'm Pollyanna, but that gives me hope when I see these inner city school kids tilling their little fields and walking through their cafeteria lines and seeing the salads and knowing they grew some of that. I feel like that has the power to change things.
Monica, that is such a profound story, and I think you're exactly right. And it reminded me, I jotted notes down frantically while you were talking because I think it also, I'm going to really wax philosophical here, so feel free to reel me in if I go too far off the reservation.
Hey, it's your podcast.
Well, you mentioned kids getting their hands in the dirt, and that inspired me to think of getting down to earth. Literally, right? Like especially with the youngest generation, Gen Z, there's so much in the digital world. And I have a day job at Microsoft, so I'm all about digital. I'm all about technology. But at the same time, there's a lot of things like in the digital realm, things are immediate. Things are quick. There's a big immediate gratification play going on. And in the real world, like if you want to grow a carrot, you cannot grow a carrot in one day. There is nothing you can do to grow a carrot in one day. It takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes deliberate action. And if we can actually help people to get their hands literally dirty and to come down to earth literally and have that more intimate relationship with natural, real, analog processes, I wonder if that can actually have a pretty profound societal change beyond just health, but even more into mental health. What do you think?
I think so, absolutely. And carrots are a terrible example because they do take forever to grow. And when you're, I know from my own little kitchen garden here, and when you're working with kids, I think that, you pick the stuff that comes to harvest a little quicker, radishes that are ready in 3 weeks, or, sprouts that they can eat in 3 days, just to set the hook a little bit. But no, I think you make a great point, that when we take our urban spaces and dedicate more of them to green space, and then dedicate some of that green space to actually producing food, it just it reconnects us to our environment. It helps us see our landscape, our cityscapes a little bit different as a place where life needs to be supported. And there is enormous benefits to. I mean, not everybody has I have like a little 100 square foot garden that I've carved out of my yard that I grow food in, it has got to be the most expensive possible way to produce, a bowl of organic lettuce in the world. I mean, and the most time consuming. And the reason I do it anyway, I mean, we have great farmers markets. I can go down and buy organic lettuce for less than what I spend on, garden toys. But the reason I do it anyway is because the time that I spend out there, it's great stress relief. It's great physical, activity. I'm out in the sunshine getting my vitamin D, and I see my neighbors, because I'm out there on the weekends poking around in my garden, and when they walk by with their dogs or their babies, they stop to chat. It connects me to my community in all kinds of ways that are sort of tangential, but central to that experience. So I'm a yuppie, and I have a little kitchen garden here, and I want to make sure that we don't make this into an elitist exercise. And that's why I keep coming back to these kids, when they're out in their neighborhoods, next to their schools, tilling their little fields. The people in those communities that live around those schools see those little people and see what they're doing and see those little plants, and they're reminded too, okay, we live in maybe in, sort of a blighted urban neighborhood, but there's life here, and there's community here, and there's young things, living things to be nurtured, whether it's a bean plant or a kindergartner. I think it does bring communities together. But wow, now you've got us both sounding awfully philosophical.
Well, let's
need to get Alice Waters on the line.
Let's actually keep it going, because what you were just talking there, it inspired, circling back to what we talked about earlier about big levers. And when we talk about health on a more macro perspective in terms of the individual, like, we're not talking about whether you have six-pack abs, we're just talking about whether or not you are happy. It seems like this relationship with food and understanding and enjoying food. Again, there is a different relationship. For example, someone goes through a drive-thru at McDonald's and unconsciously shoves a Big Mac in their mouth while they're driving. That is a very different relationship with food than sitting down and consciously chewing food. And in some ways, I'm going way off the plantation here, but I think it's analogous to going to a bar, having a one-night stand, versus nurturing a deep, meaningful relationship with another person. That deep, meaningful relationship with food, forget about from a biological nutrition perspective. I think maybe we've lost just a lever in terms of just overall happiness with life. And maybe I went a little far out there, but what do you think?
Well, I think that we also have to remember that it's a luxury to have that time and that space to develop and nurture that relationship, and that it's possible to make excuses for, taking the easy road out. But I do have a lot of sympathy for parents who are working, who it's very difficult for them. I see them sometimes heading into the grocery store in the morning, and I can tell they're at the end of their overnight shift, but they got to get the grocery shopping done. They're exhausted, whatever. They've got 4 kids in tow. Finding time to shop, finding time to prepare foods and cook foods, and can be challenging depending on what people have going on in their lives. And so that I think is there. It gets we can get all romantic about this relationship with the earth and getting our hands dirty and, cultivating a more nurturing relationship to what we eat. But, you have to have the time and the energy, the mental and physical energy to do that. So, I think now we really get far afield if we start talking about, okay, we need to reform our, childcare, maternity leave, anything else to make that possible. But
absolutely. But what do you think, for example? Again, I think sometimes there is it's a false dichotomy. It's like health is difficult, or eating healthful foods is difficult, and being unhealthy is simple. Whereas, for example, a overweight child will have more difficulty in their everyday functioning. Just think about the social ostracism. Like, even if a child were to smoke cigarettes, like, they wouldn't have a hard time getting a date to the prom. They wouldn't be mocked continuously. So I think sometimes we've just got to say, life isn't necessarily easy.
But, you're an economist, and so you understand how difficult it is to get people to delay gratification, how much people discount both rewards and penalties when they're in the future, and how hard it is for us to weigh, an immediate reward against a future penalty. And so, and with eating behaviors, it doesn't ever seem like the 500 calories I'm about to stuff in my face right now are directly responsible for the misery I feel tomorrow on the playground or in 10 years when I'm sitting home at the prom. It's just human nature. That's tough. And also, even if eating healthy can theoretically be just as easy or just as efficient as eating unhealthy, changing behaviors is hard. Changing culture is hard. And that's, part of what I think we can do in the school system to help build and, to help make the cultural shift, at the very early level. But there was something you said a couple of minutes ago that I thought made sort of an interesting pivot. You were talking about it's not just about having six-pack abs, it's about being happy. And that leads me to another kind of topic that I often have, and this is now kind of pivoting back to our 1%, the folks who are hanging on our every word and, looking up the omega-6, omega-3 ratio of every nut to decide that they too can get to the point where the pursuit of health becomes at the expense of balanced, harmonious, relationships and
Absolutely.
life. And I think that's like the other end of the extreme, where extreme focus on nutrition can start to be a little bit of an impediment to a balanced, healthy life. And there's a colleague of mine who's over on your coast, actually not too far from you, Yoni Friedhoff. He's up in Vancouver, and he has a great quote. Oh, I said this to you once before, and you said, "Oh, that's a great quote. Can I quote you on it?" And I was like, "No, you have to quote Yoni on this." But the goal here is not to have a perfect diet or even a perfect body, but to live the healthiest life that we can enjoy living. Mm-hmm. And I think that's good for those of us who are sort of involved in the higher reaches of this conversation, to remember that, you can't spend all your time obsessing about this. You do have to remember that food is more than just fuel. We want it to nourish healthy bodies, but it's also part of the way we interact with people and the world. And it's okay to enjoy things and to go ahead and let yourself off the hook every once in a while and eat something just because you love it or because it's a special occasion, as long as that's in balance with your other goals.
Absolutely. There's nothing quite like wanting something at the exclusion of everything else in your life to make you unhappy. It's a term called paradoxical intention, which, not to get again now too psychological, but if you're getting ready to speak publicly and you're nervous, the best way to make yourself more nervous is to try to become less nervous. Because think about how nervous you are and try to force yourself to not be nervous, you'll become more nervous. Or maybe another example, let's say you're laying in bed at night and you can't fall asleep. Think about how you can't fall asleep and consciously try to fall asleep. You will not fall asleep. So sometimes the harder we try to achieve something, it can actually work against us. And it gets back to a Henry David Thoreau quote, which I'm going to butcher, but it's something along the lines of, if you want to be happy, don't directly pursue happiness. Rather, pursue something else meaningful, and happiness will land on your shoulder, much like a butterfly. When if you try to chase a butterfly, it will fly away from you. But if you just sit there calmly, the butterfly will land on your shoulder. So we are all about philosophy and psychology in this podcast.
I know. We're going to be off topic for the entire thing. But, I think another way of keeping that in that truth in mind that you just expressed, Jonathan, is that, it can be fun to, follow our passions, but that it's important, especially when we're zooming in, to remember to go back to the wide angle. It's the whole forest and trees thing. Those of us who spend a lot of time examining individual trees need to make it a priority, once a day or, once an hour or something, to step back and reframe it in terms of the larger perspective so that we can not lose ourselves. That concentration is fun, but perspective is also really important.
Couldn't have said it any better myself, Monica. And what's next for you? This podcast just shows Monica is a wealth of information, folks, so please check her out. And I know you've got a bunch of new stuff coming out. Monica, what's next for you?
Oh, well, it's such a luxury to be able to kind of just sit back and talk, like you say, sort of from a high sort of conceptual level. But when we finish up here, I'm going to dig back into sort of my weekly pile of answering listener questions, recording this week's podcast, have some fun speaking engagements coming up, working with researchers on various projects. So it's always just it's always just a wide mix of projects. But it all comes back to what can we understand about food that can make us healthier and happier, and how can we? One of the things that I love so much about our era, yours and mine, of digital publishing is that it's so easy to have a conversation. I wrote my first book long before Twitter and podcasting and blogging, and it was such a one-way conversation. I thought about something I wanted to talk about. I did a bunch of research. I spent a year writing it, and 8 months later, it finally came out in print. And who knows when anybody thought of it? It was kind of lonely. And now, with the way that we create and distribute content through blog posts, through podcasts, through digital and ebooks, it feels so much more like a lifetime conversation. If I talk about something on a podcast, by the end of the day, I already know what people thought, or an alternate position, or great conversation got launched, and that's just one of the ways in which I really enjoy the era that we're in right now. And so it makes it hard to answer that question, Jonathan, because I never quite know what's coming, around the next bend. And that's what makes it fun to get up every morning to see what each day brings.
I love it. Well, folks, if you want to engage in that wonderful conversation with Monica, she's definitely easy to find. When you're checking out your Smarter Science of Slim podcast, you'll notice another podcast that is consistently at the very top of your screen. That is the Nutrition Diva podcast, and that is Monica. She is the Nutrition Diva, and you can find her on social media with the same tag. You can also find her on her website, which is a hub for all things Monica related, and that is nutritionovereasy.com. All sorts of, again, podcasts, blog posts, books, good stuff in general. Monica, thank you so much for all that you do and for the wonderful insights today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Jonathan. I always enjoy our conversations. I look forward to the next one.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's show as much as I did. I'm so excited I'm getting tongue-tied. In fact, remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter, exercise smarter, and live better. Talk with you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff, like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.